Welcome back to Game Devs Play Games, where we play games talking game design, and we are playing Final Fantasy 15. And I'm out of a job. What, I thought it was funny. Anyways, we have a special episode for you today.
I was going to say...
This is a long time coming.
We should have started this by saying, and today we're playing Justice Monsters
5. Oh, dang, missed out. All right. Okay, so I'm just gonna make a point about this game. I'm not gonna say anything about it for a while. We're just gonna make a point. All right.
Oh, hey, I didn't realize Carbuncle was over there.
Is he? Oh yeah, on the screen. Yeah. Which, for the record, when they came out with the demo, they said that you were gonna get like a special friend or whatever, and it was supposed to be Carbuncle, like when you did the platinum demo.
Right.
What is that? Where is he?
I know that the internet has said that like Carbuncle will randomly appear in places. I know that in Prompto's photographs, he'll occasionally show up.
All right.
So he's like kind of lurking by and kind of watching by, but I don't really know what.
I thought that you were supposed to, like, get him, like, because you know how he used to talk to you in the little texts?
Right.
I thought that's what was supposed to happen, like you're able to call people or something through that. Maybe it just hasn't happened in the game yet. I'm not really sure.
Well, he does that in the tutorial. Having some struggles there, buddy?
Well, no, I'm just trying to make sure I can talk to you from this angle.
I think you're pretty much okay.
All right, that's good. I don't know. Anyway, so I haven't seen it yet. Yeah, he was in the tutorial, but not since then.
So, mini question of the day. If you know what Carbuncle does in this game, unless it's a spoiler, share that in the comments.
Yeah. So, okay, so we wanted to talk about, like,
why
there's people like me who played the old Final Fantasies and rave about it. Mm-hmm. And have had issues with the newer ones, and why there are new groups of people who play play the newer Final Fantasies,
mm-hmm.
and then what this game is supposed to do for both of those groups,
mm-hmm.
and like why it's a thing.
And that's their big thing at the beginning of the game, the Final Fantasy for new and old fans.
Mm-hmm. It's yeah, exactly. That's what it starts off with. So in the older Final Fantasies, the reasons why like a lot of people got attached to those and everything was because the stories were a pretty big deal for its time.
I mean, that's even what got me hooked on Final Fantasy X, which I'll admit, like, I was a really late starter to the Final Fantasy series.
A lot of people were.
Like, I think I fall in the newer category because I don't remember that.
There were a lot of people that started on 10. The way I look at it is there were people that started with like the really early Final Fantasies, anywhere from 4 to 6, and then there were people that started on 7, and then there were people that started on 10.
Mm-hmm.
And
sounds about right.
So if you started in the earlier ones, you tend to get attached to those, and in 7 was the same thing. If you played 7, you liked 8, 9, and maybe 10, and then there was the newer group. And there's a different feel for all of those games. The first 3 were just kind of like you played these nameless heroes that just did the mission, and it was just you just kind of played them for the systems. Really, you just enjoyed playing the game.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's kind of what Final Fantasy has survived on for many generations, is that they had one of the most interesting systems from the get-go.
Yeah. I mean, that's number one. Kind of blew things out of the water and said, "Here's a new way of playing a game." Hey, mm-hmm. I got a tech ready. And it was kind of that way. 3 was a big deal because it was the first one to mention or to show job classes. Mm-hmm. And then there were, and then after that you had 4, which had the first like story, like mm-hmm. with actual people that you played, and then 5 kind of bombed a little bit, but it had the same idea. Still had some very interesting things and brought back the job class.
Oh, okay.
6 had probably the most unique character individuality of any Final Fantasy. Every character had different abilities, and there were like 14 different characters. They all had their own story. It was really cool.
Is that the one too where the first time the player couldn't name them, they already had a name?
Yes, I think you can, and no, you can rename them.
But they like start with a name.
But they started with a name. They did in the other ones too. Actually, you might have not been able to rename them in 4.
Oh,
no,
okay.
wait, you could. You definitely could. Never mind.
But either way, the focus was on having strong characters, not just strong gameplay.
Yeah, exactly. So then there was that, and then 7 hit it big, and that was the one that was the biggest one, at least in America, that like people were just blowing their minds up for, because it's different, it was cool.
And I think that one was a necessary step in the success of the franchise. I think that move to 3D was smart. I don't know if it was innovative, right? Because I think there were other games that tried 3D. I know they were very early in on it, which is why it was such a big deal. But yeah, I don't know. I guess, like, other than that, Final Fantasy VII still kind of played like the rest.
It did, actually. It's had an active battle system, which I've actually talked to Nick. I don't think I can hit this guy from... Oh, no. Yeah? Alright, we're going to switch.
But yeah, I think Final Fantasy VII is also probably the one that brought most people into the series.
Absolutely agree. Oh, there we go. Look at that. Oh, man. I'm scared again. Cool. So there was that. What? I just hit a button. So 7 definitely brought in the most people. Also because it was the thing that really made PlayStation launch. It was like, if it were not for 7, PlayStation might not have done nearly as well as it did. In fact, the RPG genre in general Final Fantasy VII did a lot for it, because things like games like Wild Arms and what's some other ones that I cannot think of, Alundra. I think a lot of RPGs came out that would the Tales series in general became a lot more successful because of Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, well, it's because they kind of created a culture of those types of players. They actually sort of made the demographic.
Absolutely.
Or at least fostered a huge source of that demographic.
It's also what caused a lot of people to shift from Nintendo to PlayStation, because a lot of people would play Nintendo for Final Fantasies because they wanted those RPGs. You couldn't get that from Sega at the time.
So it was a very smart move of Sony to kind of grab Square Enix, or at the time Square.
It was still Squaresoft at the time.
Because I remember they worked with Nintendo on at least a couple of games. Maybe it was just one.
All of them were on Nintendo until 7.
And they kind of had a falling out with Nintendo. I don't remember what the reason was.
I feel like it was probably some copyright issue or something. Nintendo
Sony has an issue of copyright trouble too.
Yeah. The 2 copyright lords, one for its own series and one for all the other series. So then after that was 8, and a lot of people liked 8, and I will still fight them to this day because I feel like it had one of the weaker systems.
That's one with Squall, right? And the gun sword?
Yeah, and the gun sword was fine, and the gun sword was cool, and they actually did a really cool thing with the summons. That was the first one where they were like, the summons are just a spell. They're more than that. There are more things you could do with them. It's really cool.
Which was the first one that started involving time as a factor? Was that 7?
In which way?
In the battle system. So, like, you can only attack when your time meter is full.
I think, actually, I was having this discussion with Nick the other day, and if I could be wrong here, but I think that was actually, believe it or not, Final Fantasy 1. I think the very first one had a time bar.
I don't think so.
I could be wrong, but I know... let's see, 2 I don't think did, 3 I'm uncertain about, 4 definitely had a time bar. Because 4 was the first one that was also like, if it's your turn and you don't want this character to go yet, you can switch to another character. I don't remember 5, 6 had an active time, but you could change it to wait mode. Much like in this, where you could be like, at the moment that the character's time bar hits, the game will stop until you take your action, so you don't have to sit there and think about it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, I guess I could just be speaking nonsense at this point, since I don't know how a lot of the Final Fantasies worked.
Yeah, I'd have to take another look. You could put it up there, Chris, just real quick at the top, just to show us if Final Fantasy 1 had an active time bar,
okay,
or if it was turn-based. So there was that one. And so a few of them had time, a few of them had turn-based. I honestly, I think the one that had the strongest turn-based was in 10. 10 had, and it was like, and it made the main character essentially, he was a time mage, essentially. And you could see what his actions would do to...
So good.
It was cool, right? You could see everybody's actions and be like, oh man, and then when I cast haste, this guy gets to go 3 times now in a row before anybody else does. Of course I want to do that.
And I don't know if they were the first ones to come up with that concept, but either the case, it read so clearly what the turn order was going to be.
Absolutely, there was no mistake in it. And I mean, like, the only problem you'd have is if it was suddenly not that person's... If it was suddenly like, oh, this person's gonna go, oh, haste just ended, so now the bar just got mixed up again. But it made the main character feel systematically more important, because he didn't really fit a niche other than that. Like, he was a soldier-esque character, but you had a harder hitter, you had a status inducer, you had a tank, you had all that jazz. He didn't really fit anywhere, except for he was a fast, wily guy that also threw magic occasionally.
Yeah, that was interesting to me too, because he's still, like, as a player that didn't really think about the systems at that point, I never thought of him as a time mage. So I just thought, oh, he's fast.
Yeah.
He does his fast, and he's a heavy hitter. He's not the heaviest hitter, but he's the best character because he's the main character, obviously.
Yeah. He can do a thing. He was really just kind of the middle road, but faster than most characters and could cast time spells. So it was really cool. 9, still to this day, one of my favorites, and I'm surprised looking back on it now, talking to certain friends who say that, like Tony, for instance, loves 9. It's his favorite. And I did not know that there were other people that cared that much about the game, because when I was growing up, nobody liked it besides me. That I knew of. And I thought 9 was very underrated for its time. It also had a time bar.
Yeah, that's the one that I think I heard about the least. The most exposure I still have to this day had of 9 is seeing the opening cutscene, the first couple of battles, and then that's about it.
And the worst part was that is not a good interpretation of what the game was like at all.
No.
That was because, honestly, they went for a specific art style with 9. It was really cool. They were trying to go back to a, like, older RPG feel with the newer 3D graphics for its time. The game was beautiful for its time period, for considering it's a PlayStation 1 game.
Wow, it was? Was 10 was the first PS2 one?
Yep.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay.
So considering it was a PlayStation 1 game, it is quite a bit ahead of its time. But yeah, so they wanted to give it that newer, almost medieval flair feel with, of course, being a Final Fantasy. And when they did that, they did a certain art style, and the main character was, for lack of a better word, ugly. He's not, like, the most attractive guy on the face of the planet, and that's all right. It worked out in general. The characters were, I don't know. Most of them were not like what you think of the typical Final Fantasy characters.
That's the one with the mage, right? With the hood and the yellow eyes, the iconic mage of Final Fantasy.
I mean, those existed since the very beginning.
That's
but
true.
He was the first one with an identity.
I think
ZZ?
that's...
Or Vivi.
That sounds right.
Yeah, that's his name. I'm a fool.
Yeah, and 10 was interesting. Maybe it was because it was a PS2 shipping title. I don't know if it was a launch title or not.
It wasn't a launch title. No.
But it was the first one on PS2, and that's when they really... Like, the earlier games, I think starting with 7, they started doing a lot of those pre-rendered cutscenes.
Mm-hmm.
And then with 10, it was so detailed that I think that's it. Once again, the graphics kind of pulled in a whole new audience, because people were like, I can't believe this is a video game.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
It was beautiful. Also, like, it introduced, if I'm not mistaken, like, it was a heavy water world. There was a lot of water, and there were not a lot of games that incorporated a lot of water into their games before.
You know what it probably was? They probably, like, made just a spectacular water shader and renderer and, like, physics processor.
We've got to use this in everything.
Like, we're gonna use this. And then there was 11, and that was the MMO, right?
That was the first one to do MMO, and that one started off, if I'm not mistaken, kind of started off as a flop, but then had a huge cult following for, like, the longest time, until 14 came out.
That makes sense, though, honestly, because as weird as it might be, making an MMO of Final Fantasy seems like a natural thing. Because the systems within Final Fantasy would work well in that system so long as they're adjusted correctly.
Yes, they would have to be adjusted. And I think that at the time they were thinking that that's where RPGs were going to go.
And I think that's exactly what it was. And to their defense, it honestly did. And you still have people that argue that is where all RPGs are going. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I do think that MMOs are going to keep getting bigger and better.
Yeah, I think really what's happened is we've seen the older RPGs are really, I mean, they are archaic as far as the thought process for RPGs go, right? And really the only ones making games like that now are Square Enix for mobile and indie creators. And that's just a lot of them are falling back on nostalgia, but at the same time, there's something about those older games where you have a nice like little crunchy system with its confines and you can't go out of that. You have this story that you're playing through. But in general, JRPGs have been suffering hardcore for the past, I don't even know how many years now. And because of that, people are starting to find different solutions. MMOs are one of those. Final Fantasy 15 with having an active system. Final Fantasy 13 actually tried to be, and its system was actually relatively solid. I just hated the game, but the system was different. It was like instead of playing 3 or 4 characters, instead you're just going to be a general in a sense. Mm-hmm. You're going to tell them what you want to see out of them, and they'll act on their own. And eventually you'll come together, and you'll still be active. It's just different.
And it sounded like 12 kind of had a similar system, and then 13 was sort of the finished, iterated version of that system.
Yeah.
I never played 12 either, but that's kind of the gist I got from it.
12 was interesting because you were able to move around, but you weren't able to do anything until, I lost a character. Well, look at that.
Oh, yeah, I noticed that.
I didn't. So, 12 was... you would be able to move around, but you wouldn't be able to do anything until your active bar came up, and then you were able to do an action. So, you would sit around for like 3 to 5 seconds waiting for your turn to come up, and you were just
weird.
moving, and you're just like, any day now, I wish I could attack. But I'm just staring at you.
I know there's some hardcore 12 fans out there, though, so I think it appealed to a certain, like, maybe not as huge of a audience of Final Fantasy fans, but I like their thought of where they wanted to move the system, and so that's why I agree that 13 was solid in terms of its gameplay. Because I agree, I thought it was really fun. I just hated the game because of how it was structured.
Yeah.
I think from a narrative and a general game flow, it just didn't make any sense. It was too railroaded, I guess, is really
it absolutely was
the simplest way to put it.
I want to spend more time with 12. That's why I don't have a lot of opinions on it, because I wanted to. I did kind of find it weird that you would have to gain badges to use weapons. Mm-hmm. Basically, there was like an ability tree, and in the same tree, in order that you would use to learn new abilities, you were also learning you're also earning the permission to wield weapons. So if you picked up a really strong weapon,
cool.
Good for you, but you can't use it until you pick up the ability to be allowed to use that specific weapon.
Right.
And that was like
sense.
Weird. So.
And then we have 14, which is basically, I don't know how that system works at all, but I assume it's the iterated better version of 11, which is why it drew in those hardcore fans of 11.
I know that.
I hope.
From what I've been told, 14 is doing very well.
That's good. I never, even if I'm not a fan of MMOs in general or a fan of Final Fantasy moving in the direction of an MMO, I still want it to be successful. I don't want them to fail. So that's actually cool to hear.
Yeah, and I think that I once again, I don't know about Final Fantasy 15, but I feel like they're doing all right.
I think they're doing pretty good.
And I think that as long as the game keeps going the way that it is, they're coming out with these expansions that are going to introduce like plots for the characters and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. They're showing that they do care about their character and their world. There's just some things that are done oddly, right? But besides those odd things, the game as a whole is functional and the characters are cool. With that being said, we're almost out of time here. So how many?
10 seconds left
I'm
on the clock.
15. I'm on 15 of the treasures. I'm on 15 treasures, Chris.
What's the
Here, can I?
what do you get?
Let's see.
Does it tell you what the treasures get you? And you've lost one character out of four.
Lost one because I was careless. Ooh, change this.
Careless.
I was careless. Oh yeah, I forgot. There's also hero text.
So
and you have to do that next to them, and then you'll blow up on them.
So just to kind of wrap up our discussion, though, because I don't think we came full circle and talked at all about why old players would come into 15 and why 15 would bring in new players too.
One would be one reason would be that the new. So the old games had there's a certain what's the word I'm looking for? Not milieu, but it's when you I forgot the terminology for it, but it's what like there's a certain setting that a Final Fantasy has. We have certain monsters. This screen is a good example right now. We're looking at there's a bomb over on the left, and then there's Carbuncle on the right, and that's I don't know how to pronounce the name of the creature, but a Cariol or whatever it is.
Oh,
and
is
then a
that
Naga,
the same?
and then it just like, but these are all monsters that are in Final Fantasies, and Final Fantasies have had the same monsters and their own interpretations of those monsters. They've had the summons, they've had the weapons, etc.
They kind of have like a shared, maybe lore's not the right word, but it's, I know what you're talking about. Like it's the same style of a world, the same kind of world building that goes into place.
Absolutely.
The core differences is the history behind those worlds.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's the same reason why there's a Cid in every game. It's it's that. And so this game went back to some of that older feel with them. We talked about it before in a previous episode. The Magitech soldiers are one. Just the Magitech idea of all the creatures in general. We went back to the 6 like core summons of the game. As we discussed, Titan actually has been there the whole time. I just, for some reason, in my head, he was only there for like 2 of them. But no, he's actually in there for just about every Final Fantasy.
So, but what you're basically saying, though, is the reason why old players of Final Fantasy would come to this one is to see what the things they kind of grew up loving, their newest transformation.
Absolutely. And seeing how they translate into a gaming world that's so expansive and pretty.
And I think, in a weird way, that's why people are generally disappointed with the movies. Like Advent Children, I think that's the name of the one, because it didn't feel like a Final Fantasy world. And
that's fair.
It cheapened the experience for a lot of people that wanted to. I personally still enjoyed it, but I guess I wasn't as like, I didn't grow up with Final Fantasy as much, so maybe I was more open to it. But
it's the movies are going to be different than the games, because in general, if I ask you, how many Final Fantasy games have you seen where 2 characters square off toe to toe against each other and sit there and talk about their philosophies on life? That doesn't almost ever happen. That's happened in like 2 games that I can think of. One in Final Fantasy IX of Steiner versus whatever her name was, Beatrix. And then Final Fantasy IV when Cecil turns into a paladin. Like, that's the only time that they were throwing philosophical discussions at you while the fighting was happening. Advent Children, that is the entire movie. It is Squall, or it is Cloud versus Sephiroth the entire time, just swinging swords pointlessly at each other because they're never gonna hit.
Oh, that's true.
Nothing is accomplished. Nothing happens.
What was the other one?
It's the term I like to use called fight salad. It's when you just put a bunch of moves together and just jumble them up, and then at the end of the day, you say, "I guess I ate something."
What was the Final Fantasy movie that nobody liked?
Oh, you're talking about Spirits Within. That's the movie that I think
that's the one I think I meant.
Had they not attached the word Final Fantasy to it, I think it would have actually been relatively successful.
I think that's why I liked it, because at that point, I didn't have this expectation of what Final Fantasy was, so I was like, I mean, it's alright, it's not a bad movie.
It just has nothing to do at all. It has nothing to do with any of the Final Fantasies at all.
I agree. It really shouldn't have had the Final Fantasy name on it.
Jesus.
And then, so I think the thing that brings new players to Final Fantasy 15 is that not only is it timely in that it's an exploration game, and those are what's hot right now. It's promised a beautiful scenery and landscape. It's promised innovative combat experience, and I think all around the game is very well built. I think it has its own appeal as, a new AAA title for a lot of people, even if you've never touched Final Fantasy before. I mean, even Jen's kind of a good example of it. I think she played 10, and maybe maybe only 10, but she got really into Final Fantasy 15 now, and it's just, I don't know, I think you don't need much reason to get into it other than it looks and sounds and plays awesome.
Yeah. And that's at least the immediate guess. I'm sure we could write a paper on why certain people would find the game fun. But...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is just a discussion and not like a scientific analysis or even a demographic analysis. But yeah.
Okay, so we're a bit over, and that's okay. I did say it was a special episode.
We actually did go way over than I thought.
All right. We're gonna finish this off. This is Justice Monsters 5. This is the mini game that we were promised in this Final Fantasy. Since at least fair, 7, there have been good mini games, and this is what we got.
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, the other mini games in Final Fantasy 15 are fun. Like fishing is awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Agreed.
Chocobo racing, I assume, is awesome. I haven't gotten to that point.
Just kind of whatever, but yeah.
I mean, but not.
I mean, maybe
not
there's
Justice
more
Monsters
to it, but
5.
This is a game that I've spent the past 25 minutes pressing the X button and looking away from the screen,
and occasionally hitting the triangle button.
Occasionally hitting the triangle button to make sure that a character didn't die. And as I said, I got sloppy there. Foolish me. This is not a game. This is not. There's no thought into it. There's no. I have done this. I don't even know how long, but I got up to something like 58 treasure points just doing this. I got up. I had enough time to look on my phone to try to find out if there's something more to the game, to try to find its origin or whatever. That's when I found out information about King's Knight. I looked that up. I walked into the kitchen. I made food. I ate the food.
I think
I started playing another game at some point. Doing this. And this is a game that we've spent 25 minutes, and they expect us to also get up to 100 treasure points, because that's when you get the best prize.
Yeah, it's weird to me because, and I don't want to turn this into a shitstorm, because obviously we still love Final Fantasy, and our whole discussion is about how Final Fantasy is basically amazing. Yeah, it's just Justice Monsters 5 doesn't really make sense from a lot of design points of view, because even looking at this from a more traditional pinball perspective, which is what this is kind of based on, maybe there's another game that this is based more closely to, but as an American, pinball's the closest thing that I can think of.
It's supposed to be a pinball-esque game, I guess.
But the way that the character moves around the screen is very unintuitive. You don't really control. You kind of control the direction he goes, but only loosely. It's confusing on that end.
But you could, yeah.
Yeah. And the challenge is just kind of non-existent. Much like you were saying, you can't really die unless you're really unlucky.
Yeah, I don't really. I just don't really know what the point is.
It just feels like a time sink, and I think that's why it's disappointing, is because there's not much going on. And so then I asked the question, would Final Fantasy 15, would it be any worse without Justice Monsters 5?
If this game didn't exist in here, then that would be fine. I would expect compensation in form of a different, better game.
And I think that's the thing, right? I think everyone expected some kind of minigame, or at least anyone that understands that Final Fantasy tends to have minigames.
Yeah.
And so people would have been upset if there was nothing. But at the same time, people are also upset with Justice Monsters 5.
I just want to point out that I'm doing worse when I'm trying.
It's kind of how it goes. Well, it's also you're also like 10 stages higher than you were before. But anyway,
Whatever.
I think that's really all there is to say about Justice Monsters 5, other than it's essentially a time sink. What do we get? Garnet bracelet. Hey, actually, that's not too bad.
I'm not complaining, I guess. Half an hour later, and it is now 4 a.m.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize time passed while you were playing that. Well,
It's
anyway,
a game, after all.
it's true. Question of the day, because I think that's all we have for this episode.
Oh, I have one of those equipped. Never mind. It's not so great.
Question of the day. What are your thoughts on Justice Monsters 5?
Let's hear them.
We love Final Fantasy.
Let's... no,
But-
we're talking about Justice Monsters 5
But
now.
but
Let's
share
hear
your thoughts on Justice Monsters 5. Thank you for watching, everyone. We'll see you in the next episode.